Okay, so just want to thank you, Michael, for doing this resume writing workshop with us today, brought by Ontario County Workforce Development. This is being recorded and will be offered on our YouTube and Facebook channel. And I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate that, Alexis. It's very nice to work with the Wood Library. So through workforce development, we provide a lot of career services to people, free of charge. We're open to the public. Resume creation, resume review, things like that is just one of the services that we do offer. So it's nice to kind of get a basic lesson out here for people to access from anywhere. One of the things that people really shouldn't underestimate is the power of a great resume when you're in that job search process. If you have that application and you can attach a really good resume to it, the chance of you gaining an interview with a business really increases significantly. And really, no matter what kind of resume you're writing, there are certain things that you'll want to do. There are certain things you'll want to do to structure and format the resume. And while there might not be one single format that everyone should use, I think if you follow kind of the basic steps that we've outlined in this lesson, I think no matter, if you're applying for an entry-level job or a very professional one, you should wind up creating a really good resume. That'll help you out in the job search. So when we talk about a resume, the purpose of it is really to present a very clear summary of your work experience. This is for any employer to examine, to look at. It shouldn't take them long to look it over and decide whether or not your qualifications match with the needs of the particular position that you're applying for. So it's really a way for employers to compare your skill sets and your qualifications to the needs that they listed in the job posting. And it's really an opportunity for the job seeker to present their best qualities to any employer. Really, the first step we talk about is getting organized. It's always one thing we want people to start with. There's a lot of details that you need to have, and getting organized ahead of time is really going to help you during the process of creating that resume. So you want to gather as much detail about your previous work history as possible. Get that all together ahead of time. So you remember the names, the dates, addresses, specific job duties that you had for each position that you held. And as you go through this process, it is very important to save your work, especially once you start writing. Save it in a safe space. If you're taking handwritten notes, put it in a separate folder, keep it up and out of the way. If you're putting anything on a computer, once you start typing out the resume, make sure you're saving that file in more than one location. You want to save it to something like your flash drive, the hard drive on a computer. You can email yourself a copy. That way you're going to be sure that even if one copy or one particular place got compromised in some way, you're still going to have another copy of all of your work. And when you do save it, make sure it is titled very specifically. We will talk about saving different resumes and the importance of tailoring a resume. So make sure that you give an accurate title to each file so you know what resume is what. So you can go back and access it very quickly. So there are do's and don'ts that we go over, and these are pretty basic, but they're very, very important as you're creating that resume. And some of the do's, you want to say more with less. We're not writing this in full paragraph form. We're using bullets. We just want to present the information as clearly and concisely as possible. And we're going to do this in no more than 2 pages, 2 pages max. If you're applying for an entry-level position, you want to stick to 1 page. We've had businesses tell us for entry-level positions, they don't want more than 1 page. They need to be able to scan it very quickly, and they'll make their decision about the interview at that point. Your most recent experience is what we're going to be working with. So really, anything that goes, beyond 10 years, you're going to leave out of the resume, or you're only going to list the place you worked. You're not going to outline job duties or anything else. So mostly we're going to focus on just the last 10 years of your work history. Anything beyond that is typically considered outdated. Now, if you had a job, more than 10 years ago, but it is directly and specifically related to the position that you're applying for, then you can add it into that resume. But other than that, we only want to work with the last 10 years. You want to emphasize your accomplishments, not just your responsibilities. So anything you achieved, anything you worked on, special projects, anything you were able to get done or improve for the business, we want to make sure that we're listing that. If you're ever promoted, make sure that gets written down as well. And we're going to use action verbs as we're listing these items. So I talked about using bullet points. You're going to have a bullet point, and next to the bullet point is going to be an action verb. Monitored, supervised, created, organized, inventoried, completed. Words like this are going to be used next to the bullet points, and then you would follow up with whatever the specific job duty was. This is all in the past tense. So all of those action verbs, they are going to end in ED. We always write a resume in past tense. These are things that you've already done. And you want to make sure you're not switching tenses as you write. So keep everything in the past tense. Also, leave out personal information. What we don't want to say is, I'm a people person. And we don't want to speak in the first person anyway, but you don't want to say something like that because it's too generic. It's a little personal. Give them an example of how you might be a people person. If you say, I spent 10 years working at the customer service counter, was promoted to front end manager, they're going to know that you're very good at working with people because you've had that job for an extended period of time. And that's one of the major skill sets associated with that job. So keep the writing as professional as possible. Proofreading, I cannot underestimate this one enough. You can't underestimate this, you can't overestimate this. Make sure that this is proofread. Proofread it yourself as you're writing, proofread it at the end. Have other people proofread it for you. Even if they're not, an employment counselor, you don't have to bring it to us, though we're certainly welcome to proofread or review a resume. Hand it to someone else, have them read it over, and they should be able to see if they can pick out any mistakes or errors. If they can pick something out, an employer's going to pick something out. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So as far as don'ts, never lie or exaggerate on a resume. This is one of the major reasons people get fired at work, is that they lied on their resume or their application. We want you to be very straightforward. We want you to be very accurate. I do kind of want you to brag about yourself, but you have to be accurate. You can't make things up or deliberately falsify information. Don't include references either. Sometimes you'll see references attached to a resume. References should always be on a separate document. The only time you even want to mention them on a resume is perhaps at the end saying, references available upon request or something like that. So keep the references in a separate document. Your resume should be completely separate from everything else. Don't use first person language. You're not going to say I anywhere in the resume. I did this or did that. So no first person language. Don't use paragraphs. Sometimes, depending on the format you use, towards the top in the summary or the qualifications section, you can write some sentences there, but it's not really a full paragraph. We want to use bullet points. We want to keep this as clear and concise as possible and as brief as possible. Make sure there's no run-on sentences either. Don't use any fancy fonts. Don't use any fancy designs, fancy letters, colors, shapes, things like this. It's distracting, and the only thing we want an employer focused on is what your skills are. So we want the resume to look very neat, very clean. Some people may say that's boring. That's fine. Boring is often very professional. So keep the formatting to an absolute minimum. Also, when you submit your application and resume, you'll very often have to get through an ATS system, applicant tracking software. And with some of the fancy fonts and formats, sometimes those systems do not like it, and they will kick your resume out, and the business will never actually receive your resume because that system kicked it out because of the formatting and the fonts. Don't use phrases like responsibilities were or duties included. We just want you to list and write out exactly what it was that you actually did. That's what the employers want to see. So these are just kind of extra words. We really don't need those in there. So these are just some basic do's and don'ts for any resume that anyone would be writing. And I said there's no one perfect resume style. There's no one format that is absolutely the one that everybody should use. Everyone's situation is different. Your employment experience is different. Your current situation is going to be different. So we may change the format or the style of resume that we're using according to your situation. Some of it's just preference as well. You're going to choose the best one that is going to outline your skill sets, your training, your work experience in the best manner possible to present that to an employer. And there's three main styles that we deal with here: chronological, functional, and then a combination resume. And each one of these styles has pros and cons to using it. With chronological, this is one of the most popular styles of resume. It's also kind of the most cliche, not in a bad way, but we start with your most recent employment and work backwards, and you list that out for an employer. This really has a great strength because it highlights career progression. If they look at your work history, they will very often see that you've moved up, you've advanced, you've taken on new responsibilities, new duties, a greater complexity, greater responsibility, and that's really going to highlight some very important traits that employers are going to look for. That steady work history is really going to go back to how dependable and reliable you are, and businesses are really looking at this right now. It's expensive to hire and fire, so they want someone who's going to stay with the company at least for some time, and really be there to build a career, hopefully for the long haul. We can see an example here of a chronological styled resume. And there are lines across here, that's fine. I wouldn't put any more formatting or fonts in there other than that. The contact information is at the top. We want to make sure the name is in larger letters and bolded so they have that first. Summary of qualifications. This section is going to be at the top of most resumes. And this is important because it gives them a quick snapshot of exactly what your qualifications and experience are. And then as you see underneath, this is really where you get the chronological format. They start with their professional experience, or you can title it work history, anything like that. And they start with their most recent, and they start working backwards. Now on this resume, they have employment that goes back to 96, 98. Obviously, if I was working with someone on this resume, I would either leave that section completely off, or we would just remove the job duties and just leave the title of that particular position. And that would be only if it relates to the job that they're applying for. So once we get 10 years and more, we want to leave that off of the resume. So this is really kind of what a basic chronological resume is going to look like. Next, we have a functional resume. With a functional resume, this is going to focus on skills. Focus will be on skills and not so much your work history. So this is going to be laid out differently. And instead of having a work history section where you start with your most recent employment and work backwards, we're going to list usually 3 skill sets specifically related to the job that you're applying to. And underneath the naming of that particular skill set, you're going to list all duties and accomplishments from any job you've ever had where you developed or used that particular skill set. And that's how the resume is going to be laid out. So it's a bit different than a chronological resume would be. One of the benefits to using a functional format is that it hides gaps in employment, and it really focuses on skill sets. So this is really beneficial if you have a very large gap in employment. You could still use a chronological format if you can fill that gap in employment. But sometimes a large gap in employment is a red flag to an employer, and they're not going to give you that interview. They're going to pass on to someone else. So if using a functional resume format is something that might be an option. One of the drawbacks is Some businesses don't like this particular resume style, and they've flat out told us that. They know that it's used to hide gaps in employment, so when they see it, some of them are automatically assuming there is a gap in employment. So this is it's a resume format that's out there. You can definitely use it. I do know some businesses aren't as big a fan of this, but as long as you are able to outline your skills and abilities effectively, and they know you have done jobs or gained those skills specifically related to the job you're applying for. Um, if you have a well put together resume, hopefully you should wind up getting an interview. And really here is where we see an example of a functional resume. Again, you still have the work summary at the top, and then you have areas of expertise is how it's titled here. So you have three main skill sets listed: reception and customer service, scheduling, meeting coordination, administrative support. So this person really has a great set of skills specifically related to office work. Each skill set is separate, but they have listed things that they have done throughout their work history that really give the employer a good chance to see what they've done related to that specific skill set. And what you can also do with the functional resume, it doesn't mean you're leaving off all of the places you've worked. They're just going to be listed, and they're listed underneath in a work experience section, but all you're doing is listing where you've worked. You're not really putting in the exact job duties that you've done at each one of those employers. This is just sorted out according to skill set instead of the place that you've actually worked. The combination resume really combines the benefits of chronological and functional styles. And this one's kind of popular because it kind of draws from the strengths of both of the other styles. It'll highlight specific work history and outline one or two skill sets. And this is really a great way to catch the eye of the employer, make sure they know what your specific skills are, and then you're proving you have those skills underneath by listing the work experience where you gained and developed those skills. So this example of a combination resume really kind of outlines the format that you're going to use. Again, professional profile. Underneath that, you have your skills listed. So you have a skills section. And you can do it this way. There are similar, formats you can use for outlining the skills. And underneath that, you're going to have the work experience where you're listing, as you would in a chronological format, where you've worked. You're going to start with the most recent and then work backwards from there. When you're listing your employment, as I've said, you can go back 10 years. You don't have to list every single job that you have always ever had. Again, anything longer than 10 years is going to be outdated and older. You could potentially list, just the last 2 jobs that you've had. That'll take you back 5 years because they're very closely related to what you want to do now, and you've also listed skills. So if you're looking to save space on a resume, don't think that you have to go back and list every single thing you've done for the past 10 years. It's not absolutely necessary, and sometimes you just don't have space to do that. So those are really the 3 primary resume formats that people will use, and it's really kind of up to you what format you would like to use. Again, I kind of caution people with the functional format because some businesses aren't the biggest fan of that particular style. But the chart here really kind of gives you a good idea of some situations people could be in, and it will recommend a particular format. So if you're a younger worker, or you have real limited work experience, sometimes a chronological resume can be a little difficult because you're lacking the work experience to list. You can still use it, and you can list work-like experiences. It doesn't have to be paid on the books experience. If you've done odd jobs for people, maybe you've done childcare, things like that that were off the books, you can still list that on there. You would use the same format as you would for any other work history entry. And then for the business, you would just say, self-employed and list it that way. Combination really works for anybody in any situation. Again, it draws on strengths from the chronological and the functional style. Functional is possible. But again, I would probably stick with a combination resume for most of these situations. If you're an older worker with a continuous work history, chronological is great. If you have anyone with a steady work history, a chronological resume really is the way to go. You could use combination as well, if that's your choice, but you're not going to go with a functional resume at that point, because you really don't need to. Returning to the workforce after an extended gap. So really a big gap in employment. If you do a straight chronological resume, it can highlight that gap, which some employers don't like. So combination is great. Functional is also a good choice here as well. But the combination will also list some of the other places you've worked. And I think businesses really do like to see that. If you're changing careers, you could use anything, but if you're changing careers, you should already have a career, probably. So you probably have a fairly steady work history. If this is just someone in the work field already and they're looking to just change to something else, chronological or combination is fine. If you change jobs frequently, I would probably stay away from chronological. If you have a lot of jobs where you've had a very short amount of time at them and you start listing them off, employers can get a little spooked because you might look like a job hopper to them, someone who keeps a job just a few months at a time and then you go on to something else. Again, it costs them money to hire people. They don't want to lose that money and then have to start this process all over again. You want someone who's going to stay for the long term. Veterans entering a civilian job. This is, anytime you're in the military, you're working. You have a job, you have something you've done. You may have to change a little bit of how you list those particular positions, but chronological or combination is really the way to go as well. And if anyone wanted some assistance or you had questions about this, you can always contact Workforce Development as well. Sometimes there's situations people are in and it's not exactly cut and dry. As long as you stick to the basics, though, and create a resume that outlines your skills and abilities, I think that's going to be just fine. So now we're really going to kind of look specifically one section of a resume at a time. Name and contact info. This is always right at the top of the page. It's the first thing they see. Name is first and in large font. We want them to remember your name. Underneath that, you really need to list a working email and a phone number. That is very important. Make sure the email is professional. Over my years of experience, I have seen some that were less than professional. If you get too cutesy with it or anyone who might find it offensive, they will throw out your resume. They will discard your application materials and you're not going to wind up getting an interview. The thought process being if you can't even be professional in the job search and have a professional email, you might be a risk if they actually hire you as an employee. Phone number. Make sure the phone number you list is a phone that you will answer. So if a business does contact you regarding the resume that you submitted, you need to be the one answering the phone. And if you can't answer, they should be able to leave a message. So make sure you have a mailbox that is not only set up, but that it is always cleaned out. It's very frustrating. I do this all the time, and I get a message saying, mailbox is full and can no longer accept messages. If I'm an employer and I'm calling you back about a resume, and that's the message I get, it's a very good chance I'm going to just hang up and move on to the next applicant. So your physical address is kind of being phased out a little bit. If a business contacts you, it's primarily going to be email or phone, and that's it. Maybe they even text you, but mostly it's going to be email or a phone call. You can list your address on there if you want, but you have to have email and a phone number no matter what. The next section, and really the first section of any resume, is going to be the qualifications section. Some people will call it the summary or the work summary. This is an overall summary of your total career and work history. We're adding everything up into this one section. This would be an example would be you had 3 jobs in retail, each lasting 2 years. So you would say 6 years experience in retail sales. This is where you summarize your experience. And this is also really where you're trying to catch some of the attention of the people who might be reading your resume. List achievements, list accomplishments directly related to the job you're applying for. A resume is not a time to be humble. You want to brag about yourself a little bit as long as you're doing so accurately and professionally. And this section is really the section that you want to tailor. When we talk about tailoring a resume, You don't necessarily have to go through and rewrite and change every single part of a resume, but the qualifications section should be absolutely directed specific to the career field or the position you're applying for. So if you have a resume that you wrote that outlines skills and abilities for production and manufacturing, you might want to move that around, and you're definitely going to want to change that qualifications section if you're applying to jobs in retail. The skill sets that they're going to be looking for are a little bit different, so make sure you're listing things that are going to outline your skills and qualifications relevant to the job you're applying to. Work history for the chronological or the combination resume styles. Your work history is going to be listed the same for each one. You're going to go the last 10 years, unless the job is older than 10 years and it's very specific or it's the exact job that you're applying for. When you list what you've done, you'll start with a job title. That should be in bold letters. Then the business, you can list city or state. But the dates of employment, you need to have the month and the year. This should all go on one line, so you're not taking up extra space. We need to know the month also, not just the year. Because if you said I worked somewhere from 2019 to 2020, you could have worked from, December 29th, 2019 to January 2nd, 2020, and you've only had a few days employment. Or you could have worked from January 2019 till June of 2020, and there you're looking at like a year and a half. So make sure you got the months listed in there as well. That's something I see very often. People only list the years. You're going to use bullets and then the action verbs that we talked about earlier. The accomplishments and duties should be clearly stated. Provide enough information. Be sure you're being specific about what you did. Not only what did you do, did you use anything to do it? Did you use specific equipment? Are there things that you need to mention because it would be important for a business to know? So your greatest, most impressive details are going to go towards the top as well. Once you've listed what the placement was, what is the most impressive thing you've done? And you want to start with that at the top. People read left to right, top to bottom, so we want the good stuff towards the top. They're going to eat that icing first, go for the cake last. Skill sets. This is going to be for a functional resume format. And this is just going to be literally, like you saw in the example, you're going to list the major skill sets specifically related to the position you're applying to. And then underneath, you're still going to use bullets and list the skills developed from all of your work history towards that particular skill set. Education and training. This section includes college, trade schools, you can throw high school in there, any certificates you've earned, training programs that you've gone through. This list is going to be typically at the end of the resume unless it's specific professional license or a certification that is specifically required for that particular job. The resumes we've worked on through our office range from cashiering up through chemical engineering. We've really run the gamut of the people who've come through our office. If you are someone who is very professional, you have some very professional degrees, the job requires those degrees, you can move that education to the top of the resume if you choose to. But most of the time, it's going to be listed towards the end. And also, just like in a chronological resume format, we're going to start with your most recent education and move backwards from there when we're listing. So we want you to make the resume yours. I know that sounds a bit hypocritical, or I've just told you what you need to do to create a resume, and then I'm telling you to make it yours. Make it yours, but make sure you're following a very good, sound, basic format. And as long as you're doing that, you can make some additions, you can make some changes, you can move some things around if you think that that is going to accurately outline all of your qualifications for the position. So you can move sections around a little bit. You can change some of the formatting to clearly outline your qualifications and show whatever business you're sending this to that you are a great candidate for that particular job. So nail the basics first. Sometimes it's overwhelming when you think about writing a resume or you sit down and you're staring at a blank screen for a while. Just nail the basics first. Get experience written out, list some skill sets. This is a process. So as you're creating a resume, I think rare is the person who can just sit down and crank one out very quickly, and that's going to be the last version of it that they have. You'll write it, you'll review it, you'll make some changes, you'll move some things around, you may find errors that have to be changed. So nail the basics first, and then know that you're going to go back and keep working on it over time. Spelling and grammar are critical, so make sure there are zero mistakes when it comes to spelling and grammar. Be clear and concise. Employers are generally going to spend less than 30 seconds reviewing your resume to decide if they're going to keep your application materials or give you an interview. And that's not much time. So it will not be enough time for them to decide if they really want to hire you, but it is enough time to decide if they want to toss you out of the application process and move on to someone else. So, in the wording in the resume, don't be too technical. Don't try to impress with language. Just demonstrate how you're a good fit for the job. So let's say you're someone who worked in a very technical industry or field. You don't know if someone else in that field will be reading your resume, or it's someone in the HR office who has never worked in that field and might have no idea what you're actually talking about. Sometimes you'll hit this with people using acronyms or specific terms in very specific language. Just keep everything short, sweet, to the point, and then you can get very specific when you go into that job interview. And at this point, typically I would turn it over to questions, asking if I covered everything. There's no one else on the call today, but we've done this before. And really the feedback is, most of the building blocks that you need to cover to create a good resume were covered in this presentation. And the feedback we got was that just the overall information was good. One question we had the last time we did this was, where should I be applying through? If I've got this good resume, how can I get this to a business? Or what should I do to get it to a business? My recommendation is, if you're in the job search process, always go to a business's website first. If you can apply through the business's website, that's the safest way to do it. It's how you know they will get your application materials. Beyond that, we go to third-party job application sites. The bigger, more commercialized sites, I always steer people away from. If you hear about a job search site or one of them emails you and you've never heard of them before, I would skip it. Don't bother using them. Two of the most well-known are Monster and Career Builder, and I actually think they're two of the worst out there. Your inbox for your email will get jammed with all kinds of stuff they're trying to sell you. And be careful of those red flags. If any site you're going through starts sending you a bunch of ads, I would recommend not using it again. If they try to start asking if you're interested in educational programs and things like that, again, click out of that one, go to something else, see if you can get your application and resume sent in through a business's own website. So that's really the best advice I have as far as sending a resume to someone. And to get that to someone, you're going to have to upload that file. Having your resume typed in Microsoft Word is very important. That's either Microsoft Word or a PDF format are the two most popular, most widely accepted formats for resumes to be in. And in fact, if you use some other word processing program, you might not even be able to upload it onto the company's website. Most of them will just use Word or a PDF document. Sometimes it might be helpful when you're saving this to save a copy in either format. So you have that depending on what the employer is asking for. And this is also especially important where if you apply via email and you're going to be sending someone a copy of your resume, it's fine to send Microsoft Word, but if you send a PDF, there's not going to be any changes made to it. Whatever you send them will be exactly how that resume is going to appear. So that's another kind of helpful hint out there as well. So I think that pretty much covers everything in the presentation that we have here today. Certainly there's more information available on resumes. You can go online and look up just helpful hints. You can go up and look at different formats for putting a resume together. I would also caution you, especially Microsoft Word, not to use a template to put together a resume. Start with a blank Word document You should have gathered all of your information ahead of time as far as where you've worked, what you've done, the details. Follow the format I've gone over and type it word for word, line by line by yourself, or we can do it. But don't use a template. If you use a template where it's copying and pasting your information into a preset template, the problem comes later on if you go in to change something or try to move a section here or there. The formatting can get screwed up very quickly, and sometimes making changes can be very, very difficult. So definitely start from scratch, start with a blank document, and type it out, and then we can move the formatting around to match a particular style later on. And Alexis, I think that's most of the information I have to cover today.
Thank you very much, Michael, and I appreciate anyone who checks out this resume writing workshop. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to contact Ontario County's Workforce Development, or feel free to email Wood Libraries, and we'll be happy to direct you to any available resources.
And if anyone does want a resume review done, we're here in Ontario County, but our email is OntarioWFD at D as in David, F as in Frank, A as in Allen, .state.ny.us.